plane just missed our school. The ground was shaking. We saw the plane crash and explode.
The bombs came down over everything. It was horrific. People were injured. Some were even dead.
Around the 1930s, during that period, there was a lot of political confusion within Europe and its politics. There was a lot of tension between the differing ideologies, and everyone was very suspicious of the German plans. These were uncertain times, and Britain felt uneasy about what was happening in Germany.
My mother and father knew what was happening because of the radio. They'd heard Churchill's speeches. They told me the war was coming, and I had to be very careful. They told me what to do.
My mother tried to prevent me from getting hold of the newspaper. But when I could find them, I would go and hide and read them. I was very good at reading. I was horrified by what was happening in Germany.
The Prime Minister went back and forth to Germany to confront Hitler, to try and avoid the outbreak of war.
The deaf community in Britain were carrying on with their daily lives, unaware of what was happening. Though people around them were talking about the war, they were still oblivious to what was being discussed. However, deaf people in Germany knew full well what was going on. They were living through the horror and could see on a daily basis what was happening.
One day, my headmaster was standing on the balcony with tables on either side and at the front, which were laid with presents. Our parents were stood all around. The headmaster began giving a speech on each child, one after another. Suddenly, 4 to 6 stormtroopers marched up to him, beat him, and dragged him out. We all didn't know what was happening. They had to stop the ceremony. Even though it wasn't finished, we had to leave.
I was given a letter to take home to my mother. The school I went to was a day school. I usually went back and forth by myself. When I got home, I passed the letter to my mother. She opened it, read it, and it made her extremely angry. The next day, she came with me to school to talk to the teacher. There was a woman there with a white coat. She was a Nazi doctor. I didn't know what was going on. All the boys were made to take off their clothes. At that time, I had no idea why we had to. Only that my mother was very angry. I was forced to leave the school because they had discovered I was Jewish.
There was a group of the Nazi youth coming towards us. They asked, "Are you a Jew?" And if you said yes, they would beat you up. I looked up at my brother, who told me to make a cross sign on my chest. I didn't know why. They asked me if I was Jewish. I nodded, but I carried on making the cross sign. I was very confused. The cross relates to the crucifix that you would wear on a necklace, but I didn't know that then. I was only a little girl, and I hadn't seen any religious jewellery. They asked me, "Are you sure you're not a Jew?" I hesitated, but in the end they let me go. A teacher came out and hurried us away. If I hadn't have convinced them, I would have been beaten.
I went to the British Embassy, asking for advice about what was happening in England. They asked me if I was British, and I answered yes. They said, "You must go home now, and go as quick as you can." I was in a state of panic. I rushed back and packed my bags and caught the last boat. I arrived in Harwich safely, but I found things were very strange. There was a different atmosphere. I caught the train to Liverpool Street Station, and when I stepped off the train, I was so shocked to see all the lamps dimmed and soldiers walking around with gas masks. It was dark and there was panic. The tube was in blackout too. When I eventually arrived home, I pressed the doorbell and my father and mother opened the door and said, "David!" And I was given a smack. A good old smack, in fact. He said, "I sent telegram after telegram after telegram, but received no reply. You're naughty for ignoring them." I said, "Don't worry, I'm here and I'm okay." But the very next day, war had broken out.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
There were lots of mothers and other women who met up talking and crying. I was a little boy at the time, and I asked my mother, "What are you worrying about?" She said that war had been declared and that the war was beginning now. I didn't really understand what war meant.
My mother and auntie said, "Pray to God, pray to God." I didn't really know what was wrong. I didn't really know what was happening.
We weren't given much information. We didn't go to the pictures. We didn't have newspapers. All we knew was that war had broken out. It didn't really mean anything to me.
Germany started invading Europe in all directions, and they were moving closer to Britain. Britain had to ready her defences in preparation for war.
I received a call-up from the army. I showed my wife the card and said, "They've asked me to join the army, but I'm deaf." She said, you must. So I went to the authorities. I went in, gave them my card, and when they began to speak to me, I said, "I'm deaf." They said, "You're deaf? Okay, wait there." Well, I waited and waited, and then was taken into another room. I was stood before a panel of officials. They spoke to me, so I said, "I'm deaf, I can't hear you, but I can see well." They were suspicious of me, and they asked me to turn around. I did, and stood there waiting. Finally, I felt a tap on my shoulder to turn back round, and they said, "Okay, that's fine." They stamped my card to confirm I couldn't join the army.
The Monday morning workers left their tube trains to face a new world. The shining facades of the West End put up barricades, sometimes of paper and glue.
Everything changed. My father was enlisted into the army. My mother, during the war, went to work in a factory. My older sister, who was about 5 years older than me, went to work in an office, and I went to school as usual. When school had finished, I would find myself being the only one at home. It's really difficult to explain how I felt. I was only 7 years old. I couldn't hear what was going on. It was very frightening.
At the Deaf Club, there was a branch secretary, at the time it was part of the BDDA, who went to a BDDA meeting and returned with a deaf badge for everyone.
I was given a circular badge to wear. It was probably about this size, and it had the word deaf written on it. When I went out, I would wear it, and it would glow.
The badge would be on your jacket lapel, and you'd have to hold it downwards when you were walking. You couldn't have it upright because it would reflect up towards the planes. The police told my father off for that.
I was watching a film at the pictures when suddenly there was an explosion and all the lights came on. I couldn't hear anything, but I certainly could feel the vibrations of the explosion. Then the lights went out again and the film restarted. A few moments later, there was a second explosion. The lights came on and went back out again and the film restarted. On the walk home, I met a neighbour from our road, Kelton's Lane. She said to us, "Do you know your road has been bombed?" We ran all the way home. What we saw was bad. All the windows had been smashed and all the doors had come off their hinges. There were ambulances all up the road.
One morning, I got up for breakfast and school, as usual, eating the same old porridge as every other day, when suddenly, everything started to shake. We thought it was a bomb. All of the boys looked at the window, and there was a big, 4-engine British plane coming down. It was filled with bombs. Something must have happened. An engine must have failed, and it was going to crash. The plane only just missed our school. The engines made the ground shake. It landed nearby and exploded. We were so lucky, because the old-fashioned leaded windows withstood the blast. All the boys were terrified. I went under the table like my mum had told me to do. We all went outside and saw that the front door of our school had been blown off its hinges. My knees were knocking together.
My two sisters and I were under the bed and my mother was on top. There were German planes bombing us. Our house was shaking. I was so scared the windows were going to shatter and fall on us. But the windows never broke. Not even a crack. Which surprised me. After that, I was terrified whenever the German planes came overhead. I would hide under the bed. I didn't like it.
Britain standing alone, yet learning with each dawn new lessons on how to go on as though nothing was happening. For Britain, like the number 15, just had to go on.
When you hear the sirens or anti-aircraft guns, you must get under cover at once. You must not stand staring up at the sky. That's the most dangerous thing to do. Take cover at once, but there's no need to rush. If you take things quietly, you will prevent panic in others. If you're in the open with no cover, lie down, preferably in a ditch.
When we were in the dormitories, an elder girl was paired up with a younger girl to look after her. When there was a siren, the elder girl would take me outside to an open trench where everybody would lie down. When the bombs had finished, the sky was bright red and sparkly. I found it very exciting. I didn't know what it was, as I couldn't hear. The explosions looked like fireworks.
I would stare at the sky, mesmerised. My mother would come and grab me by the collar and drag me into the shelter. I was disappointed, as I wanted to watch the action. I was very young, only 7 years old.
This hand rattle means gas. Put on your gas mask and keep it on. Do not be alarmed by noise in an air raid. Much of it will be the noise of our own guns dealing with the raiders.
When the sirens went, we didn't know what to do. The ARP wardens, air raid precaution wardens, looked after the people. My parents asked them how they could help us, as we were deaf. It was agreed that my mother would give a warden a key, so that if there was an air raid, they would be able to let themselves in and wake up my parents. My mother used to wake me up saying, "Get up now, quickly." We'd rush to get dressed, we'd grab a candle, and we'd go outside to the shelter. It was at the bottom of the garden. We'd go down the steps and sit on the wooden bunk and close the door. Inside, it was unbearably cold.
We knew the bombs blew up one after another in a straight line. You'd hope the Germans would release their bombs in a different direction, because if a bomb blew up next to you, you knew you'd be the next victim. Sometimes there'd be an explosion, and then another whistle, and you'd know that there was another explosion approaching. Then there'd be another whistle, and an even closer explosion. We'd brace ourselves, but then, to our relief, it would miss us and explode further away from us.
We'd peek out from the air raid shelter to check if the bombing had stopped. But the bombs continued, and the sky was full of flashes and explosions.
my friend and I cycled to London. When we got to Hammersmith, we saw all of the damage. It had been bombed heavily. We carried on and we reached Hyde Park. We could see it too had been damaged by the bombs. But then we saw that the city was the worst affected. It was in total ruins. An ARP approached us and we said, "We're deaf, we've just come to look around." They said, "Oh, no, more planes will come." And we looked at each other and said, "OK, we need to go home." I asked the ARP, "More planes are coming?" And they said, "Yes." So we went home. The ARP was right. More planes did come. Day after day, night after night, they just kept coming.
There was no doubt that the war had reached Britain. Britain was bombed very heavily, especially in the cities, London, Manchester and Coventry. Thousands of people were killed. Deaf people didn't know what was happening.
I was walking up a hill near our school. I remember I was talking with Peter when we jumped over a stream. Suddenly there was an explosion. I saw a wall of red mist.
There was an explosion. I didn't know what it was. And then I realised I was covered in flames and I was screaming. Children were running everywhere. My teacher grabbed a coat and tried to smother the flames. A man from a house across the street ran towards me and tried to put the flames out. He picked me up and carried me into the school where we waited. My teacher drove me to Haywards Heath Hospital. I was taken to an operating theatre. Edward was with me. Our injuries were treated. I was placed on the ward with Edward opposite me. I was very ill and fell unconscious. Remember when we were upstairs, we used to always see, through the window, the smoke over there?
And when they took us to the hospital, we went down this lane. The fire was over there, wasn't it? Even though it was many years ago, I cannot erase the memory of it. I can still clearly see it in my mind. It was so horrific that I could never forget it.
Britain's hospitals were full. There were so many people injured and many killed. There was no alternative but to use old buildings as makeshift hospitals. Temporary beds were placed there or tents had to be used. We had no choice. The casualties kept coming.
When we came outside after the bombing, we saw just how much damage had been done. So many people had been killed or badly injured. We put them in the bar of the Deaf Club. It was truly awful, but we had no choice. 3 or 4 deaf people had to help put the fires out. It was dreadful. I just wanted to go home. I was so frightened by what I saw.
My friend's brother was killed. I was there when his mother was told the news. It was really hard, really hard. There were times, especially after the bombings, when it really hit home.
Germany had obliterated France and were on the approach to the coast. They had Britain firmly set in their sights across the Channel.
Britain was furiously trying to save the country, but Germany was getting stronger and stronger. They were advancing, with only the Channel to separate them from us. Nobody was safe.
Well, he had come, he had seen. And now all he had to do was conquer.